Hi everyone, my name is Nour, and today I'm going to talk about a beloved topic to my heart. It's intergenerational transmission of attachment. I want to walk you through a table of contents first. Firstly, I'm going to talk about overview, the general definition, and why this topic exactly. Then I'm going to talk about the mechanisms of transmission. Then the transition into parenthood and motherhood, and finally factors that might help transmitting secure attachment. Okay, I want to start with overview and why this topic. Firstly, I will tell you what does it mean. What do I mean by attachment transmission? It refers to the process through which patterns of attachment are passed through generations, from one generation to another. Okay, why I choose this topic? Because actually I was inspired by my mom when I was thinking about the topic. I was talking to her and then she said, "No, didn't you notice that since I overcame my fear of cats, you started loving playing with cats a lot and you started wanting to have your own cat? This has nothing to do with attachment." But I thought about it, I was like, yes, but how did you correlate this? She told me, until you were 17 years old, you had nothing to do with cats and your siblings as well, because I had a phobia of cats. But since I started overcoming this, I had an idea of how much you love cats, but you couldn't show this love actually because you were following me. And I thought, if this was only about cats, what about relationships? And it was the way I encounter life through my mom actually. So yes, I want you now, this was supposed to be an activity, but I want you now for 30 seconds to visualize this empty family tree. Visualize your own family members of having something similar to what I said now. Like, what did you get from them? What is something that you unconsciously do without knowing that actually it comes to you from higher grandparents, parents, for example. Keep it in mind, I can discuss our presentation. Okay. This is a segue to my second point. In a meta-analysis of 61 dyads in 13 studies, it found that 75% of mothers and infants had matching attachment styles. So actually transmission happens, and with a very high percentage. So now I'm going to talk about the mechanisms of the transmission. Firstly, the modeling behavior, which is simply observing parents. So in turn, I learn how to do life with my parents. Like, for example, I see how my parents deal with conflict with each other. I see how my parents deal with conflict with me, how I'm being punished. Am I being punished by staying alone, talking about my feelings, or sometimes talking about my feelings, sometimes being ignored completely? Emotional regulation. Do I see my family when they are in conflict with each other and they are able to emotionally regulate? This is how I actually learn to observe, but I'm not only observing, this is like my handbook of how to do life related. Secondly, the family tree, we mentioned that earlier. Family dynamics, grandparents, siblings. Actually, grandparents plays a huge role because they are the one who raised the parents in the first place. So they play a huge role in transmitting the attachment firstly to the parents and then from the parents to the child. Finally, child and adult attachment and contrast is my favorite part, through caregiving and parenting style. And I want to expand more in this now. Okay, let me walk you through this. Childhood experiences with attachment figures. They affect our, firstly, internal working models. Secondly, how we relate to people, especially our parents. And finally, how we view the world. In turn, or in contrast, this influence, it will influence, another tap, our representation of what it means to be a caregiver. It will influence our mothering behavior. It will influence how we interact with our children, and this in turn will form my child's attachment style. So, okay. This is such a small representation of what goes through the mom's mind and the child's mind in each attachment style and parenting style. For example, the secure, nurturing, supportive, and emotionally available. In return, a child who is open to feelings, positive self-esteem, confident in their abilities, and anxious, a mom with an anxious attachment style, overly involved or overprotective, not always consistent. I'm not saying this in a negative manner, I'm just addressing everything, not generalizing anything. This will lead to a child who is somehow confused. They have sensitivity to others' emotion, especially mother. they go out of their way to seek attention. An avoidant mother would be less responsive. She encourages independence at early age. This leads to a child who has difficulty asking for help, loves to spend time mostly alone, and struggles with intimacy. Finally, a disorganized mother, she would have difficulty maintaining a consistent parenting approach, like fearful or chaotic interaction. She wouldn't be able to be consistent, and then will in turn lead to a child who has inconsistent behavior, fear of caregiver, which leaves them confused of like their own needs and their own selves. Okay, this actually paves the way for me to talk about maternal sensitivity. Maternal sensitivity means the parent's sensitivity to the child's needs, or how do I respond to my child's need in a sensitive way. So I actually summarized it in 3 steps. Firstly, awareness. Awareness means I have the awareness to recognize my child's cues or the signs he's giving me. Interpretation is understanding the underlying meaning of these cues. And finally, response, doing or taking the right decision or response to meet these needs. So I want to give you like an example or an overview of the sensitivity of a preoccupied parents or an anxious parents. They show mostly inconsistent sensitive responses, like for example, they are insensitive to low intensity attachment needs. Like for example, if their child is being moody, this is low intensity need, they wouldn't actually be so responsive. But usually they are very sensitive to high intensity needs. For example, if their child is crying, they would be very sensitive. And insecure dismissing parents, they would be very supportive in stress-free conditions. Like, we have nothing to do now, we have nothing to stress about, you did nothing wrong, so I'm so supportive. But when it comes, they immediately disconnect when the child shows signs of discomfort or like distress. So their sensitivity is actually going to a spectrum. Sometimes they are sensitive, sometimes they are not, based on their attachment style. Okay. But it's not always that simple, actually. It's usually an interplay of factors, a lot of factors. I want to walk you through this part now. So, for example, a study done on 150 dyads reported that a more comprehensive model of transmission would be including much more factors. Now I want you to focus on me. I had a lot of struggle trying to understand this, so I summarized it in a sandwich method. This is the first breath, this is the last breath, this is the caregiver's attachment, and this is the child's attachment. What happens in between in 2, 3, and 4 is actually every factor completes the other. They play in like an overall interplay. Each one affects the other, not only one. For example, the context. What I mean by the context is my context, is my surroundings supportive or are they stressful? Secondly, the parenting style. Is my parenting style sensitive or insensitive? Lastly, susceptibility of the child, high or low, which means like I might be an insensitive parent, I might have a stressful context, but my child's reaction to this is low, so they wouldn't be very affected, or for example, they wouldn't have a high susceptibility. High susceptibility is when the child is very sensitive and have a big reaction to what is happening, or to the parent's parenting style of the context. Okay.
ممكن I cite you on that. So أنا بشرحها بعد كده.
Yes, ممكن أجي أتفرج. So for example, this is pathways to help you understand more. In the pink, it's the parent's attachment style. يعني أنتوا فاهمين. Okay. Okay. For example, if the parent's attachment style is secure, the context is supportive, the parenting style is sensitive, the child's reaction is high, he has a high reaction, then his attachment style will turn on being secure. If the parent's attachment style is secure, the mother is secure, her context is stressful, her parenting style is insensitive, but the child's reaction is low, so they will also turn out secure. Finally, if the mother is insecure attachment style, her context is supportive, her parenting style is sensitive, and the child's reaction is very high to this, they will turn out also secure. Okay, so this is a very interesting study. It examined the attachment phenomena across familial generations. So they explored the relationship between a parent's early attachment style and the infant attachment style. The results were very interesting actually. It revealed that what was important was not whether the parent has been deprived or nurtured as a child, but it was the degree of the coherence versus incoherence in the parent's memory of the childhood. I know this sounds huge, but I will explain now. This means that one of the things that determines the generational passing of an attachment style is the organization of the mother's narrative of how it has been processed over the organization of her childhood memories. For example, it was found to be the most crucial predictor of attachment style rather than actual lived experience. Like for example, if the mother had been through adverse experiences in life, if the mother invested in herself, explored herself, and finally she reached to a coherent story about what happened to her in her childhood, and she resolved everything that happened. This is what will determine the transmission of her attachment style, not what actually happened. What will matter at the end is how she organizes this story of what happened in her childhood and how she interpreted it and invested herself and went through it and reflected on it to finally finalize this and come up with a story of hers. Yes. Last, transition into parenthood. Okay, Doctor, this is from your PhD years. So it's not uncommon that this transitional phase triggers the woman's attachment as well as her caregiver system. Like for example, the internal working model of parenthood that we mentioned earlier. But other than early experiences affecting the caregiver during transition into parenthood, there are a lot of contextual factors that comes into play as well, which are, okay, firstly, this is a study. It's very interesting. It found that women become more anxious across the transition to parenthood if their partners are showing anger, they are not showing enough support, if they are perceiving less spousal support through this. So if the mother is actually secure, her transition into parenthood, if she went like this, if her partner is actually showing more anger, she will actually turn more anxious in this transition into parenthood. For example, another example is women who entered parenthood seeking less spousal support, and those whose husbands were really avoidant, the woman became more avoidant across the transition. Actually, for the secure one, men who tried to be less avoidant, less anxious, less angry through their wife's pregnancy, their wives actually turned more into secure through the transition to parenthood. And last one is reactivation of early attachment experiences, which means like when I'm parenting my child, for example, and something happened that triggers a situation of my own childhood, my early attachment style gets reactivated. So this affects my transition to parenthood actually. When this happens, when an incident happens that reactivates the mother's early attachment style, it actually affects as well her transition into parenthood. Okay. I love this word. Emotional regulation. So, okay, just like we check the weather to plan our day, children as well, they look at their parents to predict the emotional climate at home. Like, for example, are they entering a sunny, warm environment, or should they prepare for emotional storms? I visualize the sun as the parent, and the emotional conflicts and stress as the storm. So emotional regulation manifests here if the child knows that no storm will omit that the sun will rise again eventually. But another case would be, I don't know if the sun will rise again, I don't know when, I don't know if it will even rise. This actually applies to emotional regulation. Like for example, a child would be, am I sure of my parents' love even when they are angry? Am I open to talk about my feelings, or do I have to predict the time that the storm will come? Do I get a reaction that makes me feel connected to my feelings, or I am continuously told that talking about my feelings equals conflict? So yes, last thing is factors that might help forming a secure attachment. Firstly, the role of early bonding. Those two things actually affects the role of early bonding a lot, because if the mother planned the pregnancy, if the mother actually wanted the baby, if she had those excitement arrangements about the pregnancy and the baby, this would help her bond directly when she gave birth. And this will, in fact, like, set a stable base for the bonding between her and her baby. The role of awareness as well. Let the parents, for example, reflect upon their own selves before giving birth, before deciding to have a baby. Did they explore their own conflicts, their own psyche, for example, before doing this? Do they have an idea أصلاً, and this exists, that I can transmit my attachment style to my child? And if they do they decide, مثلا, if they found out that their attachment style is insecure, do they decide to, for example, transmit or not? They بحس إنه they have the decision of deciding to transmit or not if they are conscious, but if they are unconscious and they don't have the privilege of this awareness. So I think this plays the most powerful role actually. Finally, I chose this picture because I loved how they are interlinked here and they are part of each other. For a long time, for the first year, they are not two beings, they are one being actually. So I love how this represented it. So finally, I chose this topic because I thought how easier it would be for parents to know that a lot of things weren't necessarily their faults, or even if it was a fault at all. And for us to know that too. And I think that this gives us the privilege of deciding if there's a cycle, we want to break it or not. Or leave alone the cycle, we get just the privilege of awareness, which I think is very, very valuable. I get so emotional about this. Thank you.
واو بجد واو.
بجد يعني I love everything about it من الماتشنج مع السلايد.
نفس الكلام اللي جاي مور. يا جماعة بجد.
أنا عارفة الأفكت اللي محطوطة.
وأي want to thank مريهان بجد عشان she went with me في كل ده واحدة until I reached this.
The content is really interesting, really interesting. Everything that you mentioned, I feel very strongly about. يعني بجد it's such an important topic. You explained it really nicely, such a simple way. برافو عليكي والله very well done.
Thank you.